We are going to have this parent loss panel, and it is going to be moderated by Meghan Riordan Jarvis, who is here today. And she is going to be joined by Barri, Leiner Grant, Brennan Wood, Ken Ross, and Heidi Gessner. So I will quickly introduce all of them, and then I will turn it over to Meghan. So hello, everybody. So let's start with Meghan. Meghan Riordan Jarvis is a clinical social worker and best-selling author of the memoir, The End of the Hour, and the book, Can Anyone Tell Me? She is also the podcast host of Grief is My Side Hustle. So welcome, Meghan.
So
And
good to be here.
joining her is Hope Edelman. Hope is a renowned author, speaker, and TV personality. Her best-selling books include Motherless Daughters, Motherless Mothers, and The After Grief. Welcome, Hope. Joining her is Barri Leiner Grant. Barri is a grief specialist and founder of the Memory Circle. Her work has been featured in the Washington Post and Psychology Today. Barri utilizes writing as a healing modality, honoring her late mother in all of her endeavors. Hello, Barri. And joining her is Brennan Wood. Brennan is the executive director at the Dougy Center, devoted to supporting grieving children and families. She does her work in honor of her mother's legacy by making every day a celebration of life. Welcome, Brennan. And last but not least, my favorite name, Heidi. Hi, Heidi.
Hi.
Heidi is a board certified chaplain specializing in bereavement support. She provides spiritual care to families facing end of life issues and educates healthcare professionals on compassionate care for the grieving. So welcome to this dynamic team. Please follow them on Instagram. They have amazing posts. And I am going to turn this over to Meghan. Thank you, Meghan.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Thank you so much to both of you for having us and putting this on. This is such a special day. It's, you can bring your coffee and sit down and hear from such extraordinary voices. Like I've listened to Donna and David beforehand, and I'm so happy to be here with this panel. Folks who I adore and others who I'm getting to know better. Ken couldn't be with us at the last minute, so we're sorry and hoping he's going to be feeling better soon. I would love for folks, our panel, to be able to take a minute to introduce people to our work and also, I think maybe use us as those guideposts. When people are coming into the grief and loss space, they're carrying their own pieces. And with parent loss, often folks have a piece that was from a while ago, a piece that is new, some that they're carrying that it feels heavy, some that maybe it even feels more like a relief. And I know that each of us in our own work have been informed by our experiences with parent loss. So I wanted to ask about both the piece that I think gives the hope, which is how do we carry the legacy of the person that we lost? How do we honor them? And I'd love for you guys to answer that professionally or personally. What is it that you do? Is it a regular practice? Is it something that, infuses your work? And slash or how do you carry the grief? We know that grief has seasons to it, that it has components where what people believe before they go through it is it's going to be linear and it's just going to lessen and eventually peter out. And those of us that have carried loss over lots of time and work with grievers know it's far more complicated than that. And so I'll just start by saying one of the things I've been talking about recently, even though we're headed into the warmer weather, is I was really stunned this particular holiday season by and maybe I taunted the universe because I had said openly multiple times, I've done pretty well. My dad died in 2017 of cancer. My mom died suddenly in 2019, it just absolutely stunned me and made me ill. I was so undone by her death. And I said out loud a couple of times, the holidays just really haven't been the time that's been really hard for me. And lo and behold, 5 years after my mother's death, 7 years after my dad's, I was just brought to my knees. I cried every day. I can still have a little choke in my throat. And I was really stunned by that. I was really stunned by just how much I missed them. I was so sick of not talking to them anymore I'm so tired of that. I often text that to a friend. I'm so sick of my mother being dead. And I did find as I came out into the new year that there was this little fire in my belly about feeling really deeply connected to them through that loss. And that it led to some writing that I was doing, and it led to some, this kind of a conversation and a speaking engagement. So that was my experience. And I would love, maybe Hope, I'll pass it to you. Will you talk to us a little bit about your work, a little bit about how the legacy and maybe the loss shows up in those things, and anything you might want to add to it?
Sure, sure. Thank you, Megan. Thank you for moderating this panel. And thank you to Gloria and Heidi for all of the work that they do. It's an honor to be here with my esteemed colleagues. I'm fresh off of a 4-day retreat that just ended yesterday afternoon for women who lost mothers up to age 18. I work in a very specific niche in the bereavement world. I work with adults who were bereaved as children, which is a very underserved population in the bereavement world. So most of my clients and most of those that I work with were children, teenagers, and young adults when a parent died, specifically a mother in this past retreat. Though my most recent book, The After Grief, is about losing a parent or sibling, whether you're male, female, non-binary, at any age up until young adulthood. I was 17 when my mother died of cancer. I was the oldest of 3 children. Here's a photo of her. My mom, Marcia, this is probably in the early 60s. And I think I honor her every day through my work. I run online support groups. I run in-person retreats. Brennan has been to one. Barri has co-facilitated one. It was the 27th retreat yesterday. 12 women up to age 18 when their mothers died. And we're exploring how that early loss and the lack of support, since most of the women in the room lost their mothers in the 1970s, 80s, 90s, when grief support and places like the Dougie Center simply weren't available, and grief literacy was at an all-time low. And so we look at how that loss continues to show up through their lives, and it does in some very predictable ways. Megan, as you were saying, grief is seasonal, it is cyclical. I work with women who will have upsurges or upswells of grief decades after their mothers died.
Yeah.
It will come at holiday time. It will come on a anniversary of their death, especially a big round number like 10, 20, 30 years. It will come when they realize that they have lived longer without their mother as they did with her. It will come when they approach and reach and pass the age of their mother's death. It will come when their child reaches the age they were when their mother dies. So I'm kind of a one-stop shop for women who reach those milestones or are just feeling stuck in their lives because the coping strategies that they develop to get through losing a mom at an early age and not having her during formative experiences shows up in their lives in unexpected ways many years later. Does that answer the question?
Oh, yeah, it's so beautiful. What it makes me think of is that phrase traumatic growth that everybody wants, but sometimes it's hard, particularly in early. Yeah, and
Post-traumatic
sometimes
growth,
it's
right?
hard in early or fresh grief to kind of know, or even be able to hope what that might look like, right? When you're really in your pain, hearing from folks that something good might come of this can make us feel minimized or uncomfortable. And I
Right.
think when you're describing your work, what it's reminding me of is that there's lapse of this. That kind of growth continues for people, just the same way the pain can also continue for people.
Absolutely. And the needs of the recently bereaved are very different than the needs of the long-term bereaved. And we do have a support group every Thursday evening just for women who lost mothers, adult women who lost mothers in the past 2 years, to recognize that the kind of community and support they need is very different than a woman in her 40s who lost a mom when she was 12.
Mm. Hope, it's so beautiful. Thank you. Thank you for answering the question that way. And also, I just know it's got to be a tired morning for you, having held space and been with people, and just a gift to have you with us this morning. Brennan, will you tell us a bit about your work at the Dougie Center and maybe your loss and the legacy and how you carry those things?
Sure. Thanks, Megan. So happy to be here with all of you. Yes, so my mom, Doris, died 3 days after my 12th birthday in 1987, which led me to walk through the doors of Dougie Center for the first time shortly thereafter. And you're so right, Hope. I was so lucky to live in Portland in a place where Dougie Center was started. It was the first of its kind in the country. You know, a lot of the work that Dougie Center has done is to try to train folks across the country and around the world on not just becoming grief informed, but also how to support children and families who are grieving so that less of us or more of us get the support that Dougie Center gives or a place like Dougie Center gives. And so I'm so grateful for the support that I got at Dougie Center, and yet also, right, we carry both things for the rest of our lives. We carry grief with us, and I appreciated Donna's words as always around the pathologizing of grief, and that if we treat it as an illness, then the only thing is a cure versus it being a lifelong natural, normal experience that we're all going to go through. My father died when I was 36. He died the day before my birthday. My mom died 3 days after my birthday, and he died on the day where I was turning 36. My mom died when she was 36, and I had lived 2/3 of my life without my mom. So yes, to hope what you were saying about those big milestones, right? I think the thing for me that is so present always is that um, I don't want to forget about my mom. I don't want to not have an ongoing relationship with my mom. And so if that means that I then carry grief with me for the rest of my life, then that is what I'll do. And I think that, I often think of my work and kind of my life as a prayer to my mom, as my prayer to my parents. And that there's so much in that, right? And it's not just one thing. It's so many things, and it can be beautiful and hard at the same exact moment. And I think we in general don't give enough space for people to hold so many different things at once and all of them to be true. So through my work and my story, I just hope to offer that, especially I think to folks who are newly bereaved. It's not a matter of a cliche or, find the silver lining. Those things can minimize true pain, and those are awful. But how do we encourage people to lean into their own internal, whatever that is, however we create shift in ourselves, and maybe that's through for a lot of folks, that's through advocacy, that's through community work, that's through creativity, it's through writing, it's through, there's all sorts of ways that we as humans express deep pain and deep grief and deep love.
God, that's so beautiful, Brennan. And one of the things I love so much about your story, I think a lot of folks will say, I wrote this book, I started this organization because I did not get the support that I needed. It was not there. One of the things I love so much about your story is that you were supported by the same organization that now, lives the legacy. I think that's so extraordinary. It's such a beacon of hope in and of itself to
Thank
be,
you.
receive it and then also be it. I just think that that's so great. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank
Heidi,
you,
will
Megan.
you introduce yourself and maybe well, you've heard the question enough now.
Yeah,
Talk about the legacy and the loss.
right. Thanks, Megan. And again, I'm so grateful to be here with everyone. Thank you. And just sharing and talking about our experiences, I think normalizes it for people, in so many different ways. And so much of what each of you have said, I relate to. My mom died 3 days before my 60th birthday. My dad died when I was 30. So, I mean, feeling different about those, as far as my father, that was really my first experience of death. And I really kind of found my life through that, which I'm sure many of us here can relate to. Um, and he was a type A businessman who, when he was diagnosed with terminal lung cancer, his authenticity, his genuine humor, we connected on ways we never had before. And I feel so lucky to have been able to journey he lived 4 months with that. And one of the things he said is, I just don't want to lose my dignity. And we heard that. I have 3 siblings and my mom, and we had hospice at the end. And it was really quite amazing. Like, his cat was on his bed and we had friends. And I, like you, Brennan, I felt so much support through this from the universe in ways of serendipities and signs, and songs would come on the radio that I was thinking of. And then even acquaintances, people I didn't even know that well, leaned in and helped me. So remembering my father's, wish of not wanting to lose his dignity, and experiencing all this depth and support, I went into hospital chaplaincy so that I could support other people in the way I was supported, and have, provide as much dignity as recreating that in the hospital setting. So started a bereavement support program where I was working at University of North Carolina hospitals, and then actually left the hospital during COVID, fast forward 20-something years, because my mother had advanced Parkinson's. So with COVID and masks, I stepped out and was her main caregiver for, through COVID. And I moved her 3 times in 2 years during that. And somehow wrote my book about my whole experience with chaplaincy, Pockets of Grace, and my experience of the grief I experienced with my father, that also was such a growth time, that and supportive time, and finding the sacred that I hadn't before in my life, what matters, using creativity and writing and sharing that with hospital staff, and in nature, like finding solace in nature and support. So it's interesting with my mother's death 2 years ago, this past December, because I was a caregiver, and maybe, I'm sure there are some people who are caregivers were parents. And I was so exhausted when she died that I don't think I really started a grief process the way I am now 2 years later. So what you're saying, Hope, about, it can be whenever it shows up. When she first died, it was a relief for me. And I was sad, but I was happy for her too, because she was just not in a good place and in pain. And just now, over this last few months, I'm remembering her when she was healthy, which I couldn't do at first when she died. I'm remembering her, like, funny little sayings will come to mind, and I'll be saying them, and I'll be like, oh, thanks, Mom. So I feel like she's very much with me, but back to before she was so sick right now. So it's interesting, just kind of feeling it and just being aware of her around me and missing her.
It's so beautiful what you just described. And what I'm struck by when you're talking, Heidi, it feels like talking to somebody from my hometown that's referencing all the landmarks and the experiences that I, like, oh, the playground at but the grammar school and the library, that when you're talking about the elements of spirituality, that's such a common thread that grievers need to talk about. When you're describing what it's like to care for someone over time, that thing where, like, your mind can only remember them in illness for a while, and then it just wakes back up and brings people are so afraid they're not going to have that memory of their healthy loved one. And when you've been through it and also held people in that space, you can offer them sort of that hope and, that joy. I was moving my camera because it's so tiny, but I have my little 333 necklace on because in the early days after my mom's death, I just was I was so unwell that any spiritual message, anything that could, allow for there to be some kind of connection to something larger was really turned off in me. And actually, I'm so excited to introduce Barri because I feel like Barri has been in constant conversation while that has been lighting back up and growing in me. Barri, will you introduce yourself and talk about your legacy and loss?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me. I owe so much of my experience to Hope's book, Motherless Daughters. In 1993, I lost my mother, Ellen. In 1993, nobody was talking about grief or grieving. And the message I got from the universe at 27 and society was, and my stepfather, that we were all just going to return to work. At the time, I owned a public relations firm in New York, and I think the message I got was I was very much a grown-up. You got this. You had her for this much time, and you're good. You're cooked. You're an adult. And I think the one thing that has been certainly profound for me was not only meeting other motherless daughters, like that this is going on, and it has gone on before and it will continue to go on, but there is so much loneliness and there is so much isolation when the world is telling you one thing and you feel something so wholly different on the inside. So when I found Hope's book, I found all the women on the pages, all the people she had interviewed, there they were. And suddenly I was not alone. And it gave me the permission that I felt I needed in opening up conversations. And those conversations, I almost felt after that, like I must be wearing a magnet or some neon sign on me because I met motherless daughters wherever I would go. And having these conversations, I realized like there was nothing about me that made me the sad girl, which I think I was fearful of if I had had those conversations aloud and shared my feelings. So a lot of those feelings were like in a little diary and bunches of journals. And I've been a writer for as long as I can remember. And it certainly helped me make sense of the world. But then my world grew when I started to have these conversations with other motherless daughters. I realized as different as our relationships might have been with our moms, there was so much that was so alike. If you had told 27-year-old Barri, fast forward, that she would be on a retreat sitting next to Hope Edelman and helping co-facilitate, I wouldn't have believed you. It was such an honor. And also, again, just that affirmation that we really do need to show up for our grief in a way that is on purpose and with purpose. And I call that a grief tending practice. And once I realized like it would not make me the sad girl, and it actually would make me what I say now is a hope dealer. And that is like a little nod to hope. And also so that when I say I work in the grief space, I don't clear a room, and I just say, I'm a hope dealer. And I think what my interest in and I loved what you shared, Heidi, about keeping my mom's legacy alive has been not only to start my company, which is called the Memory Circle, where I too sit with folks one-on-one and lean heavily into writing and the science of writing and why that works and why that helps and how we can be our own story witness, perhaps if we don't even have one, and we can make sense of the grief outside of our body when we see it on the page. I keep my mom's memory alive in so many ways, partly because she didn't have a lot of stuff. My mom died when she was 50, and it looked like she knew she was going. She died suddenly in a beach chair, an ending my mom may have in fact written, her favorite place on earth. But there was very little stuff. There was very little to like hold on to. And so I became a crazy memory maker. Snippets of handwriting in frames and charms and tattoos. I have a 444 on my body that would totally horrify her, but it was a number that I kept seeing. So I think the idea of keeping her memory alive and her legacy alive has been the honor of a lifetime. And sadly, I have to update my bio between the time that I said yes to being here today. I also lost my dad, Neil, and I was his caretaker with my siblings for over 10 years. He lived with memory loss. It's a muscle I'm learning to flex for sure, saying that I am now a girl grappling with that, what it feels like to no longer be a caretaker, what it feels like to get in the car and not want to like go visit him. You know, I feel like I'm on autopilot. So allowing, as Heidi was saying, the before dad that I never allowed, those before memories to come rushing back in, flowing back in, is so different than the sudden loss of my mom. So a grown-up orphan, I think we need our parents forever. So no matter what age or stage you are, just remember that. I think there's this, whether you're 60 or 6, there is this changing of the guard that makes us official grown-ups, unofficial grown-ups, if you will, in the world. And I think just give yourself the grace and space and honor that at every year, whether you become their age or grapple with their birthday or your birthday or whatever it is. Just remember to give yourself the grace and space.
Hey,
that you
Heidi, thank you. It's been fabulous, and what great information,
Yes.
and what a great panel.
I've learned that it helped me to help others, to know I'm not the only one, put one foot in front of the other, find a life.
Adding hope to the darkness, you start on the trip to recovery.
Reach deep down inside and say, I am going to live on.
We laugh, we cry, and remember.
Hope without action doesn't work. Hope with action can change the world.
We always say, if you've lost hope, please lean on ours.